Good evening, friends, or good morning if you're on the other side of the world. Welcome to Monk Chat, where you are welcome. And you're also welcome to ask questions to our monastics who are actually placed in order of height. Interestingly enough, I am realizing it just now. This was not planned, but we created a little slope. And welcome to Gita, Jens, Melinda, Mary, and Eleanor. And we have here, Bhante Sudazo in the middle, and to my left, which might be your right, Bhante Suhano, and to my right, which might be your left, because I think YouTube flips the thing, the image, is Tan Santi, who has just joined us a few weeks ago from Temple Forest Monastery, a beautiful monastery in the Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chah that is in New Hampshire. And he has come here for a few months to spend time at Empty Cloud with us. So, as usual, the rules are that there's no rules actually, but the encouragement, but that's always giving me weird looks, is to ask questions related to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, or somewhat related to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and our monastics will try their best to answer them. And tonight we also have this opportunity on Facebook. So friends from Facebook, you're also welcome to type them in, and I'll try to see if I'll ask them to the venerables here. All right, so finally we have some questions. So Jens is asking, venerables, in reflecting on the teaching this morning, as one refines the mind and as a defilement is weakened, can that defilement try and reassert itself, almost as a last-ditch effort or a death throw? Wow. Is this something you have experienced or observed? So maybe each one of you can answer so the other people have time to type in their questions. Starting with Bhante Sudazo, since Bhante Sudazo gave the talk, and then...
Yes, and yes to all your questions. Yeah, usually our practice actually is one of trying to weaken our defilements and making some apparent progress, and then they have a resurgence, and then we try to weaken them and they have a resurgence, kind of like the pandemic actually. So in the beginning, there's no lockdowns and everything's out of control and getting worse and worse. And then they start making lockdowns and things start getting a little bit better. And then they loosen up again. And then there's like 200,000 cases a day. And it's like, whoa, how did that happen? And now they're talking about lockdowns again. Well, I hope they're talking about lockdowns. That might be wishful thinking on my part. So it's the same with our mind. At some point we realize, oh, my defilements are really out of control. I need to start putting some lockdown protocols into place. So we start practicing at restraining our defilements. And we start to make some progress. And often what happens is that we make some progress and then we think that everything's cool and we're in cruising mode and it's all fine and we can relax a little bit. And we relax a little bit and the unwholesome thoughts start flooding back into the mind. And the reason for this is because until we uproot the tendency towards unwholesome thoughts entirely, they will keep floating to the surface. They'll keep growing when the conditions allow them to grow. Which means we need to keep up the effort of our practice, and also that we need to work on addressing the underlying delusions that are the breeding ground for defilement in the first place. So those are my thoughts.
Great. Bhante Sumano?
That was pretty all-encompassing. I guess I will say, though, that in my experience, too, a lot of times we can maybe fool ourselves into thinking that we've sort of done the work that needed to be done. Usually, I think in my case, when there's something relatively easy that's been like achieved, like, well, when I see this person anger doesn't arise in any situation. So clearly I've overcome anger. But then the sort of difficult or challenging person comes around who you may not, see very often. You may not encounter them very often. And they come into your experience, and all of a sudden the anger that you had thought you had overcome just boils up to the surface. And it's very similar to what Bhante Sudaso was saying, but also this sense of it's the things that really sort of stick us where it hurts that show us actually how far we've come along in the practice. So it's the situations or the people that really challenge us, that if we don't see them then or interact with them, then clearly we're not going to have this sort of response. But once we do get thrown into an environment where we have to confront the defilements, it can kind of seem like, whoa, where did this come from all of a sudden? But it's been there all along, just waiting for the right opportunity to sort of rear its head.
Great. Santi?
Well, yes, it's very interesting how when the defilements manifest, they're always particular. It's not general hatred or envy or anger that overcomes me. It's a particular one. Something irritates me. Something makes me angry. Something makes me envious or sad, and I am in a state of woe. But as Bhante Sudaso pointed out, those defilements, when they're there, are coming from a deeper underlying tendency. And I've been thinking lately that it's the particularity of the way they manifest that really points to what that underlying tendency really is. I've for a long time found the idea of an underlying tendency kind of confusing. The anusaya, as they're called in Pali, language of the suttas. But lately I've been coming to see that, or think at least, that, and maybe starting to see a little bit, that the anusaya are very particular too, to each of us. I think in kind of the modern way of looking at it, the anusaya are like our stuff, my habitual tendencies. There is something more general that I think that the states share for everybody, and ultimately they're the same for each of us. But I think, it seems to help over time to work on what pushes my buttons, as Bhante Sumino was pointing to. Like, what is it that makes me angry? Why is my anger in some situations so disproportionate to what it is in others? And then wonderfully, sometimes it's gone, and those are important times to look at as well, to appreciate.
Sadhu. Thank you, Venerables. And Eleanor is saying, I'm having a hard time understanding the differences between Vipassana and Shamatha meditation. How do they differ? Do we use different techniques to practice them? Maybe we can ask Venerable Santi, since I think this question, we have the answer from the other two Venerables floating around on YouTube.
Sorry, I haven't gotten to hear it yet. That would make my job a bit easier. Well, I think it's, you can find many Dhamma teachings on how those two often described as separate paths are separate. My emphasis is not on how they're separate, but on how they are actually different aspects of the same practice. Ajahn Chah described those vipassana and samatha as two ends of the same burning log. That image has stuck with me since I saw it when I just was starting out reading his marvelous teachings. Just practicing seclusion, mindfulness that cultivates a sense of seclusion or refuge from the flow of thoughts and feelings. gives rise to calm, the calm that leads to collectedness, to samadhi. The two are intertwined, they're inseparable. Teasing them apart, it's a wonderful, delightful kind of intellectual and, well, I don't want to, that word can have negative connotations. It's useful to do, to learn what characterizes what, but don't let it get in the way of practice. Just practice, and both of those wholesome factors arise together.
Sadhu. Thank you, Venerable. And Ethan says, Dear Venerables, have you ever experimented with the Dhutanga practices? So anyone is interested in volunteering? No, we got the wrong monks. If we had Venerable Pamuto here on the panel, he could give an entire Dhamma talk, actually an entire series of Dhamma talks, but you'll have to wait. So you'll have to wait for next week.
I'll have one reflection, which is that I did do a cemetery practice once with at the urging of Bhante Pamuto. So
Sadhu.
That was it.
Great.
Yeah, it's actually anybody who's been to the lawn of Empty Cloud Monastery has already heard about that.
You have to come to the lawn of Empty Cloud Monastery, says Bhante Pamuto, and then you'll hear about it. Or you can come next week to the panel and ask him directly, because he won't be on the panel next week. Bhante Sudazo?
Yeah, I've experimented with a handful of them from time to time. Eating only one meal a day. I did that for a while, until finally the abbot of the monastery told me that I was getting a little too narrow and that maybe it was time for me to be a bit more practical about things. And also that that particular Dhutanga is more effective for greed types, and that my own character, being more of an aversive type, it maybe wasn't actually the most relevant to me. So that also points to the conditional and specific nature of the Dhutangas. The Dhutangas are not necessarily right for everybody. And each particular Dhutanga is meant to help with working with particular defiled tendencies of mind. So a certain Dhutanga might be very helpful for one practitioner and actually quite useless or even counterproductive for another, which is why they're in their own special category of these optional practices, which may or may not be relevant for you. I did also try the sitting practice, the practice of sitting up all night and not lying down. That lasted 3 days, at which point I was exhausted all the time and my back hurt really badly. And finally I was just like, okay, I think I'm just going to lie down at night like normal people. I poked at some of the others from time to time, but those were the ones that were the most memorable for me. Anyway, yeah, wait for Bhante Pamuto. He can tell you all about the Dhutangas from personal experience.
Sadhu. And Mark says, unless Venerable, okay.
So you, on the other hand, might want to do some Dhutangas.
Maybe.
Bhante Sumaro is a great type. Disclaimer. Mark says, this is his Dhutanga, being in robes.
Yes, obviously.
Some people, just being a monk is already austere enough. That's already a double dose of renunciation. Don't necessarily need the triple dose, at least not yet.
Yes. And Mark says, what is the right attitude to have should Nimita arise while in Samadhi or Jhana? I heard that in the Upakilesa Sutta that the Buddha struggled with bringing a cessation to Nimita.
Stop thinking so much. Just keep your mind on the meditation object. It really is that simple. It just blows my mind. People complicate samadhi so much when it's the simplest bloody thing in the world. Pick an object, stick your mind on it, keep it there. That's it. If you follow this instruction, you'll enter jhana eventually. If a nimitta arises, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Just keep your mind on the object. If a nimitta doesn't arise, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Just keep your mind on the object. That's what gets you into jhana. It's the stability of the mind that does not stray from its object. That's the core of samadhi. Don't get wrapped up in the whole nimitta chasing game. I've met a lot of people who do the nimitta chasing game and don't get anywhere as a result. Okay?
Right. Thank you. Anything else that the Venerables would like to contribute? All right. Next question. Gita has a question specifically for Bhante Sudazo. You mentioned this morning that one should cultivate experiencing samadhi stillness and let go pondering on the Dhamma. How can we develop this stillness and letting go?
So this is kind of like somebody who's running in circles and they're like, how can I experience stillness? And I'm like, well, just stop running in circles. And they're like, yeah, but how? And I'm like, just stop running in circles. So that's really the thing, is that, again, in samadhi practice, so ordinary samadhi, so object-based samadhi, you pick an object and you put your mind on it, and you don't do anything else with your mind except keep it on the object. And in this way, all of that running around in the mind starts to slow down and eventually comes to a stop. So it's a very simple practice. So by not feeding the movements of mind, then they start dying out. There is a little caveat here, which is that technically putting your mind on the object is a subtle movement of its own. But you don't need to worry about that anytime soon. That gets resolved much later on. In the most of the development of samadhi, having an object is very helpful. There is such a thing as objectless samadhi, but it's a bit more advanced. And if your mind is still running all over the place, objectless samadhi is usually inaccessible. So pick an object, keep your mind on it, keep putting your mind on it, hold your mind on it. And gradually all the other movement in the mind starts to fade away. And then you'll start to experience stability of mind. Okay?
Wonderful. Thank you, Bhante. And hello also to Brian. Good to see you online. Well, that was actually the last question. All the 22 people tuned in on YouTube must be all living in monasteries with monks and ask them questions all the time. It's a very silent crowd tonight.
Oh, that's fine. We can end early.
Yeah. So, and also the people on Facebook that are watching, quite a few. If you would like to ask questions to the Venerables, you're welcome to type them in, and I will ask them questions about Dhamma. Or perhaps not. Or maybe everybody's disappointed that Bhante Pramuto didn't talk about the Hutanga.
Well, maybe Bhante Santi can talk about his cemetery sitting experience to warm the crowd up.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Did you actually sleep in the cemetery?
No, we just did a along the.
Oh, that doesn't count. Who hasn't meditated in a cemetery a couple of dozen? Okay, that's a little cooler, but still. I thought that Dhutanga was about sleeping in cemeteries.
Or dwelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about sleeping. Yeah.
Yeah. Because if it's just sitting, I've sat in cemeteries many times. That's not the same. Anyway,
well, we have now an interesting debate between the monastics. So the panel is spicing up. It's both questions and answers now in the panel. But Mark is asking, what is meant by worldly jhana? Tansanti?
Worldly jhana. I'm not sure what's meant. I'm not sure what that's referring to. There are the material jhana, maybe. There's the material and the immaterial jhana. The first four.
No, I think he's actually referring to something which comes up in the commentaries. There might actually be one sutta which refers to the idea of worldly jhana and transcendent jhana, like world transcending jhana. But I think it's all in the commentaries. This idea that there's ordinary jhana, which is just about the bliss of samadhi, and then transcendent jhana, which is a factor of the path to awakening. But this distinction, as far as I recall, it's not found anywhere in the suttas.
There's one point I like to reinforce, which I mentioned once, possibly in mic chat, that the word jhana, which has now come to be synonymous with special, clearly defined, or not so clearly defined, but exalted and unique states. In the original context of the Pali Suttas, can be interpreted that way, but it's also the word that's used for meditation. It's a general word for meditation. I've often thought, if you're familiar with the standard Pali formula for the jhanas, the recurring stock passage, the pericope, the jhana pericope, it's very well known among people who are interested in the jhanas. I've often thought it could be translated not in the first jhana, in the second jhana, in the third jhana, but rather in the first level of jhana, the next level of jhana, the third level, such that we think of it just as a continuum of what happens when samadhi deepens to a sufficient point. And for myself, thinking of it that way helps to kind of de-escalate that sense of wanting to get a jhana. Just take away the or the. It's just meditation, jhana, that deepens to the point of starting to unfold into these deep states of peace.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So while there do seem to be distinct stages to the progression of samadhi, they also blur together at the edges. So seeing it as like one continuum of ever deepening samadhi, I agree, is helpful. And also recognizing that it's also a natural continuum from our ordinary state. So in our ordinary state, we have a very low degree of samadhi, maybe 1% samadhi. But as you start to put your mind on the object over and over again and hold it there for longer and longer, then that rises to 10%, 20%. So then you might say that the fourth stage of jhana is 100% samadhi. So it's more this continuum of building up your samadhi or deepening into samadhi, depending on how you want to look at it. But yeah, the distinction between worldly jhana and world transcending jhana, I don't think that's in the suttas. I think that's from commentaries.
Yes, actually, Mark is saying that Buddhaghosa said worldly jhanas.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Buddhaghosa, just to be perfectly blunt on the matter. He says a lot of things which, in my opinion, are pretty far off the mark. He also says some interesting things, but he does say a lot of things that I find quite imaginative and not much in line with what the Buddha said.
All right, thank you. And John has a question for each one of you. Where is consciousness?
Not a valid question.
Tansanti?
It's right here. Where else could it be?
Patisudazo?
I refrain from answering.
Wow, a lot of Zen answers.
We could give another answer would be, where does it feel it is? What does it feel like? So similar to the instructions Bhante Santi was giving during meditation. Well, where does it feel that consciousness is? Where is consciousness? You can use that as a meditation question. There's actually a very similar meditation practice that's done in Tibetan Buddhism, where you keep asking yourself, where is the mind? And one of the lovely things about this is that as you keep asking the question and trying to feel where the mind is, then your concept of what the mind is starts to shift pretty dramatically. So you might try this as a practice. Rather than ask us, where is consciousness? Sit down, cross your legs, sit up straight, set your meditation timer for 30 minutes or 60 minutes or however long, and then spend those minutes periodically asking yourself the question, where is consciousness? And really try to feel where it is. See what happens and report back to us.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And Gita is sharing that in Ajahn Chah's Stillness Flowing, his experience in the cemetery overnight was an incredible adventure. Well, cemeteries are also a lot more exciting in Thailand, for good or for worse, than they are in the West, where we tend to sterilize a little bit more the experience. So they're, at least I don't know these days, but definitely at the time of Ajahn Chah, the cemeteries were more lively, and actually at the time of the Buddha even more so.
Rotting corpses getting chewed apart by coyotes and so on. You don't see that so much in American cemeteries. Yeah,
things have changed throughout the, well, not even centuries, millennia now. So a little bit of a different experience. And Robin is saying, if I am remembering right, a few weeks ago, Bhante Sumano said that abandoning sensual pleasure starts to become easier after one becomes more familiar with non-sensual pleasures. If that sounds right, can you say more about that experience? Did this start before you entered the monastery?
Sure. Yeah, it actually did start because I first heard that piece of advice from another monastic reading or listening to one of his talks. And it's in the suttas, actually. So there's a sutta, I forget which one, in the Majjhima Nikaya, where someone goes to the Buddha and, says that basically the pleasure you experience through the senses is the only kind of pleasure that can be experienced. And the Buddha, of course, is like, that's ridiculous, actually. And countless times in the suttas, the Buddha describes sensual pleasures as lowly, vulgar, basically obstacles to true happiness. And instead, he recommends the Bliss of Renunciation, which is one translation. The joy that comes actually from giving up the constant pursuit of pleasant sights, sounds, smells, tastes, etc. So when I first heard that, obviously, because I didn't experience that, it's like, okay, well, let's give it a try. And so for someone who hasn't, say, attained, jhana, for example, then you start with like simple, smaller things. Something as simple as, the joy that comes from just sitting down and watching the breath in meditation, just in the very beginning. And comparing how that feels to, say, really wanting ice cream and not having it, and just examining both experiences. So this was something that I did constantly. I was, finding myself in situations where there was sensual pleasure arising, and there were things that could draw me. And I just watched, my reaction to them. Like, how did I respond when there was this really nice thing that I wanted or something I enjoyed? And watched my mind before, as well as during, and then afterwards. And eventually I came to see that a common pattern that I saw, at least in myself, was that there was this like hunger, thirst, fever, all things that the Buddha describes actually, beforehand for what it is that I wanted. And then when I got it, sure enough, there was some like, oh, yeah, this is okay. Maybe not as good as I thought, but it's pretty good. But then there came a point where it almost like it just felt like completely, like I was completely uninterested in what was going on. And then there was actually this like discomfort because now I needed to find something else. And so I would see how that just kept repeating itself. And sometimes it would happen with the same thing. So I would say, you know, go to Starbucks for a pumpkin spice latte or something. And the whole time I was like really looking forward to it. And I would get it, drink it, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. And then, so I'd leave, go home. Then the next day, I really want a pumpkin spice latte. And it seemed like ridiculous after like dozenth time that I kept doing and repeating this pattern, even though I knew that the previous times it was not what I ultimately actually even wanted. And so actually reflecting on that, then it made that sort of drawback apparent. But then, so the pleasure of renunciation, or the pleasure that comes from things that aren't sensual, was something I started to focus more on. And it came mostly in meditation. Or if not even in meditation, then in things like helping others, compassion, loving kindness. So these things that don't stimulate any of our senses, but does uplift the heart in a way that you really can't even put a finger on. So just this joy that comes from seeing someone else feeling joy, the joy that comes from having a still mind, the joy that comes from not wanting or needing anything, and paying attention to those moments and just enlarging them. So I actually found it was like a really fun exercise. It was like a challenge almost, to be like, okay, well, how can I find these moments that aren't dependent on the senses or sensual pleasure and still feel joy? And then because I personalized it in that way, it stopped being just, well, somebody said there's something that can be experienced in this way, but rather there was a direct experience of that. And it's important, especially if you become a monastic as a greed type, to cultivate that, because if you don't have sort of this source of pleasure that's not of the senses, then of course you're going to be, you know, trapped in sensuality constantly. But the more you cultivate this mind of letting go, mind of being free from sensuality, then the more you start to see that it's possible and that you actually like doing it.
Thank you, Bante. And Melinda is saying, helping my sick mother is very tedious. I'm very attached to her, but I do not want to be this attached again to anyone. It hurts a lot. Please keep me in mind, Venerables. Oh, Melinda, sending you warm wishes. And I'll ask perhaps Tansanti to share some words if he feels inclined to do so.
Sure. Maybe I guess someone is asking me because she knows I have an elderly mother as well, who I spoke with recently, and I'm glad to report she expressed a great interest in our talks and online offerings. So I'm going to be careful with what I say. Yeah, it's interesting when I the word attachment connects to the teachings of the Buddha and the noble truths, which lead us to understand that attachment is deep in the mechanisms of suffering, and of course that is not just true, but it's part of the noble truths. But we need to understand that the word attachment is just a translation of a much broader concept. That some attachments are much more of a burden than others. That there are there can be not just attachment in its negative sense, but commitment in its positive sense. Taking care of your mother can be very, very difficult. It can also ultimately be very fulfilling. Not that you have to do it perfectly, not that anyone can do it perfectly, but yeah, I guess this connects a little bit with what Bhante Sumino was saying about the pleasures of generosity, and in general, I would say the pleasures of sila, of character and integrity. If you feel a sense of love for your mother and a sense of appreciation for what she's given you, and you recognize that that connects you to her in a way that's not just attachment, but also commitment to her when she, is at a stage of life where there are needs that she has. It's not just gifts for you, but the need for you to support her. That can actually be a really positive source of growth, despite its difficulty.
Thank you very much, Tan. That was very helpful. And hello to Jessica. Good to see you online. And Liz. Sierra says, could you discuss the different interpretations regarding the devas and other beings mentioned in the suttas, and how some people believe in them literally and others see them as symbols? Bhante Sudaso perked up, so I think that's a question for him.
They're real. They're everywhere. In fact, they're probably watching you right now. In fact, there's probably some in your room right now. So yeah, I don't know why people think they're not real, except just their own biases and the prevalence of scientific materialism these days. Honestly, I think that's really what it comes down to. Up until very recently, it was actually the prevalent belief in every single culture all around the world since beginning this time. It was the prevalent belief that there were all manner of spirits of all sorts, some friendly, some not so friendly, some more powerful than humans, some perhaps less so, all around us, and that some people can see them and hear them and communicate with them, and most people perhaps can't. So this has been a standard element of the human experience for as long as there's been humans, which has been for eternity, by the way. So the Buddha spoke about these beings because they're real, and the Buddha interacted with them. Just like I speak about cats because cats are real and I interact with them. So in the same way, the Buddha spoke about spirits. He spoke about devas and ghosts and spirits of all sorts because he interacted with them. He knew them. And he knew countless other people who interacted with spirits. And actually, if you start talking to people and asking questions with an open mind, then you'll start to discover that odds are many of your friends have interactions with spirits. And perhaps they've been hesitant to tell you about it because they know that you don't believe in it. I remember when I was a teenager, I was once talking to a young lady, and she started talking a little bit about some of her spiritual practices and the interactions that she'd had with the spirit world. And at the time, I was a scientific materialist, so I started mocking her, which was not very nice of me. And of course, she stopped talking about it, and she never mentioned it again for the rest of the time that I knew her. Never again. We had talked about other things, but she never again mentioned her experiences with the spirit world. And that's actually the experience that people who have interactions with the spirit world, this is very common. They pick up very quickly on who they can talk to about it and who they can't talk to about it. So odds are you've put yourself in the second category, which is why people don't talk to you about these things. But if you speak to people with an attitude of genuine openness and curiosity, then you might find that you actually know a lot of people for whom spirits are just as real as cats and dogs. So I would encourage you, have an open mind. The way you phrase the question implies that you're already a bit skeptical and closed to the existence of these beings. They're real. They're all around us. Okay.
Thank you, Vante. And Tom?
Anything else?
I'd offer a follow-up comment on that. If you don't believe in devas, for example, or if you're Christian in angels and devils, if you don't believe in those kinds of beings, let me ask if you believe in anger, fear, temptation, inspiration. In a scientific materialistic worldview, these are the kind of psychological forces that, as Bhante pointed out, every other age of the world have been understood to be spirits. You can look at the teachings from that perspective and do all of the work that we've been talking about.
Thank you.
While keeping an open mind. And what was the other missing?
Vante Sumano?
That attitude.
Those are great. Nothing to add.
You sure? No cherry on the cake?
I'd also just add briefly that as one gets to a deeper understanding of the Dhamma, it becomes clear that the mind is capable of producing any experience whatsoever. This is actually what the first line of the Dhammapada is talking about. So right now it's producing the experience of being a human. But the mind is also perfectly capable of producing the experience of being a cat, or producing the experience of being an angel, or producing the experience of being a ghost, or producing the experience of being a demigod, or producing the experience of being pretty much any kind of sentient being imaginable. So when we reflect on this, then it becomes clear from a strictly logical inference point of view, it becomes clear that all of these experiences are possible from a subjective standpoint, which also means that interactions with such beings is possible from a subjective standpoint. So purely through a process of logical inference, one can arrive at the inescapable conclusion that all these beings are perfectly real. Well, as real as anything is, which is not quite real. But it's just as real as everything else, let me put it that way.
Thank you.
One thing that came to mind actually, was the word belief in the question, or did we bring it up?
People believe in them literally, and others see them as symbols.
So I was thinking about the word belief actually, and I was reflecting how a lot of the things that we've personally experienced for ourselves is actually quite tiny in comparison to the number of things that we believe or that we take for granted. So for example, we believe that our parents are our parents, for example, but we actually have no memory whatsoever of having, say, been born. Usually anyway, I don't. We believe in our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, but we've never seen any of these things, and nobody else has actually, for that matter, at least no one that most of us have spoken to. And so we kind of take for granted a lot of things that, we call reality, whether it's, something that we at least think we can feel, whatever that means, even though feelings, as far as I know, have yet to be measured by any device. And so when it comes to things like, devas, or even not too long ago, the belief, let's say, that animals can experience the world themselves. Part of it is, questioning really where is the boundary between what we call a belief and what we call, say, a fact. And is it simply based on, whether we believe in like a scientific mechanism for measuring something, or is it really just something that, makes us feel comfortable, or something that confirms something we already hold to be true? And once you start looking at these things, at least in my experience, I found that my sphere of things that are possible open up. It opens up to the possibility, actually, that these things can actually be happening right in this very moment, and I have no idea whatsoever that they're happening. So I'm surrounded by 6 people who are all thinking, feeling, seeing, experiencing different things, and I have absolutely no idea that it's taking place. And so I could say, well, I actually don't believe there's anybody in this room with me. These are all just like dummies, empty shells sitting in front of me. And I'm basing that belief on the fact that I actually can't see their thoughts, feelings, emotions, experiences. But does that mean it's not real? Does that mean it's not occurring? So to kind of like play with this idea of what's real, what's not, what I believe, what I don't believe, and see, what is it actually that's holding all of this up? And sometimes it's something as simple as, well, we've been told that these things aren't possible, so we believe they're not possible. And so to really just question that and to be open to a different perspective, which, like Bhante Sudaso pointed out, has actually probably been the more long-lived perspective than our short time as scientific materialists in a capitalist world.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Venerables, for sharing all your thoughts. Sierra is clarifying by saying, I do believe in such beings. I was curious to ask because I wanted to see your view on this. I have heard both sides and wanted to get your take on it. It is yet another thing in Buddhism that has aligned with my personal experiences. Do you think it's skillful to explore these beings, or is that distracting from the goal of the practice?
I don't think it's necessary, and in most cases, I don't think it's helpful either. Just focus on cultivating wholesome qualities. Focus on cultivating generosity, morality, samadhi, and wisdom. And as a side effect of your practice, you may also find that you become more in tune with other beings. So if it happens as a natural side effect, that's fine. But I don't recommend actively seeking to develop such contact or such ability because it doesn't seem to have any direct correlation to the path of awakening. There's an interesting story from the suttas where a malevolent spirit sneaks up on Venerable Sariputta, who was a fully enlightened disciple of the Buddha, known for his incredible analytical wisdom. So this malevolent spirit sneaks up and whacks Sariputta over the head. And Sariputta, of course, was such a powerful practitioner that it just gave him a little bit of a headache. Like it didn't injure him or affect him at all, beyond giving him like a little bit of a headache. But the point I'm making with this is that even a fully enlightened being doesn't necessarily have the ability to communicate with spirits. Some of them do, but not necessarily all of them. So clearly the ability to communicate with spirits is not a requisite for attaining enlightenment. Possibly for Buddhahood, but not for becoming an arhat.
Sadhu, thank you, Bhante. And hello to James. Good to see you, friend, after so long. We were missing you online. And also Miguel, good to see you. You're in Chile, so I wonder, is it the same time, more or
Morning,
less?
probably.
Morning in Chile?
I think so.
No, it's only
It's
like
in-
2-3 hours off from us.
Oh, somebody
It's
said
south
good
of here.
evening. Maybe they were somewhere else. Yeah.
Ooh, James has been in a car accident with his wife. I hope
Oh,
everything is
oh.
all right now. We're better now. Okay,
Hmm.
good to hear that all is good.
Hmm.
Or better anyway. 2020 is always a little bit interesting year. And Liz is saying, good evening. Following up on John's question, are we and everything simply infinite consciousness? Maybe we can pass this on to Tansanti.
I'm not sure. It's a question that falls in the category of what the Buddha called a speculative view. It's a question about which I can only speculate. If we take the authority of the teachings of the Buddha as our guide, there's you really have to cherry pick. There's a very few passages spread out throughout the canon, the Pali Canon, that would accommodate that belief. What you described is kind of the basic idea of the teachings of the Vedas, the Brahmins, who were the religious leaders of the society where the Buddha taught. And what seems to be the case throughout the suttas is that he's using their language to tell them that, well, no, consciousness is not a substance pervading the entire universe of which we are just manifestations. Consciousness, our awareness, is like all the other constituents of our being, our bodies, our experience that we see in the form of the world around us, our perceptions, our feelings, all of our thoughts and intentions and volitions, that along with all those other parts, we also have this knowing quality, that those things all work together to make us what we are, but that each of them is something conditioned, something that arises, something that passes away.
Thank you, Venerable. Do the Venerables like to add anything on the matter?
Just make a brief statement, which is be wary of any statement that starts I am. Okay.
One thing that comes to mind, I was reading a sutta where the Buddha was being posed these sorts of questions. I forget which kind exactly, but same realm. And I liked one response that he gave, which was, whether or not we're infinite consciousness, we're still suffering. And that's what our practice is aimed at putting an end to. And I like that Tansanti, I think last night, mentioned, we have a way of asking questions that lead to other questions, that lead to other questions. And it's endless. And meanwhile, we're not practicing, we die confused, as Bhante Siddhasa would say.
That's from the sutta.
Also. So in some ways, I don't think the question needs to be answered, because the answer is not going to make you happy. It's like what I realized with ice cream. Ice cream wasn't going to make me happy no matter how many times I had it. And in a similar way, sometimes, whether it's a question of consciousness or self or, what are we, who are we, why are we here, what is the universe like, what does Buddha actually experience? It's like, well, they're great questions, but do they actually help us to practice in such a way that we can finally stop this constant searching and actually even stop questioning? So I would say, it's fine to have like an intellectual curiosity, but it gets tiring sometimes to constantly be running the mind through a shredder, it feels like sometimes, to really come up with the questions, figure out the answer, and come up with another question, thinking that if we finally get the answer to these questions, then we'll be released. And that's not going to happen. So I would say, like the person who had asked about where consciousness is, to just practice actually with yourself with the question and see what arises non-verbally and what arises from your own experience. And then when you see sort of the dimensions of the answers to those questions, then you kind of see that actually the answer is, one, not that interesting, and two, is not almost even worth asking so much as understanding how our mind works in the first place.
Sadhu. And James, has a question. I think
Actually, one more comment. In a number of suttas, the Buddha says one should regard any sort of consciousness whatsoever, whether near or far, coarse or subtle, large or small, past, future, or present. Any consciousness whatsoever should be seen as, I am not this. This is not me. This is not myself. So it sounds like infinite cosmic consciousness would still fit in the category of any kind of consciousness whatsoever. Okay.
Sadhu, thank you. And as I was saying, James, I think, has a question that is probably good for Bhante Sudaso. Is Buddha nature just the mind without craving, or is it simply another label for knowing emptiness, anatta?
Well, I don't like the term simply, because the mind free of craving is in fact a fully enlightened mind by definition. The Buddha mind is the mind that is free of craving. But that's not that's not a simply, that's actually an incredibly exalted and magnificent thing, which carries with it infinite wisdom and compassion. So it's not something to be swept aside so lightly. What was the other thing he asked?
Is Buddha nature just the mind without craving, or is it simply another label for knowing emptiness, anatta?
Again, I don't like this word simply, because directly knowing emptiness in full precision is also something incredibly exalted and magnificent, which also is synonymous with full enlightenment. So again, I wouldn't use words like simply, because that's missing what an incredibly profound thing we're talking about really is. Again, I'm not quite sure you're using the term Buddha nature correctly. One way of relating to Buddha nature is that every one of us has within us the ability and the capacity to be a Buddha. That all of us have the capacity for the same perfect wisdom, perfect compassion of a Buddha. All of us can be Buddha. So yeah, we can be what you're speaking about. We can achieve complete freedom from craving. We can come to a deep, direct understanding of the true nature of reality. And that is Buddha nature. It's our ability to be Buddha, to achieve the same achievement that every other Buddha achieves. Okay?
Thank you, Bhante. And Mark says, most traditions emphasize the heart and dwelling in the heart. Yet the Dhammapada says, dwelling in the cave of the heart, the mind, without form, wanders far and alone. Those who subdue this mind liberated from the bonds of Mara. What is meant by this stanza? Any volunteers?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, most traditions emphasize the heart and dwelling in the heart. Yet the Dhammapada says, dwelling in the cave, parenthesis, of the heart, the mind, without form, wanders far and alone. Those who subdue this mind, liberated from the bonds of Mara. And he asks, what is meant by this stanza?
Well, first off, I'm always very hesitant of any time a translation includes brackets, because brackets indicate that the translator has added something, representing the translator's own interpretation. So if I recall that stanza correctly, it simply says dwelling in the cave. And I think it's the commentaries who said that that meant the heart. But if I recall correctly, it just says dwelling in a cave. So dwelling in a cave, the mind wanders far and near. Well, you can actually take that very literally. So take the stereotype of the ascetic monk meditating in a cave. So you're sitting in a cave, literally, meditating, but instead of practicing samadhi and panya, your mind is just wandering all over the place. So that would be an example of not being enlightened. It's an example of being lost in the clutches of Mara, chasing temptations. So subduing that mind, which is wandering all over the place, is starting to subdue Mara, starting to subdue temptation and defilement. So I would just take it very literally and not get caught up in talk about heart, especially since that, again, if I recall correctly, that stanza doesn't actually include the word heart. And also keeping in mind on that note, this distinction between heart and mind is completely non-existent in Pali, as it is in Chinese for that matter, and Japanese. Like there's no distinction between mind and heart. It's the same word, same meaning. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante. Anything else that the Venerables want to add? No? All right. Next question then. Miguel is informing us that it's 10:20 in Chile. Well, it was 10:20, so now it's 10:33, I assume.
Yeah, so they're only 2 hours off.
Yeah, 2 hours off. And Yusef is asking. Hello, Yusef, first of all. Good to see you online. He asks, what does Vajrayana has that Theravada doesn't? It seems to be considered as the fastest way to enlightenment. Is that correct? Bhante Sumano wants to answer this question.
Oh, no, I don't. I barely know anything about Vajrayana, so I can't answer. Sorry.
Okay, then maybe Tansanti really wants to answer this question.
Well, I can take on the last part of the question. If you ask, well, typically each of the everyone thinks their way is going to be the best way, or at least we lean that way. And I think the path of wisdom is to look at the teachings and not think about what you're going to get out of them, which one's going to be the fastest ticket out of here, but which seems most true to you, which seems wisest, which speaks to your own, which makes sense to you, and you can trust a well-established ancient tradition like Vajrayana or Theravada to be able to take you a pretty long way towards the goal.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for sharing those very wise words, Bhante. And Secret Spy Records, that I always forget your real name, but I never forget your pseudonym, which is great, asks, Buddha nature can't be grasped, I think.
Too much thinking.
Okay. And Sierra is saying, do dreams have any relevance according to Buddhism? Can one have insightful experiences while dreaming or in an in-between awake and asleep stage? Thank you, Venerables.
This question sounds familiar.
It comes up pretty often.
It sounds like Sierra asked this question once before, too.
Could
I
be.
wonder. Anyway, I don't want to answer. I was just observing.
then maybe Tansanti.
Dreams can be really fascinating. There's a kind of allure. They have a lot to teach us at one level. The basic point I take away from dreams is that, wow, the mind can create a complete reality without any input from the external senses. Once you've got that point, though, I wouldn't get too caught up in dreaming. The Buddha did not encourage dream meditation. There's no instructions on lucid dreaming in the suttas. In fact, there are probably Bhante Sudatta could say more about this, but there are a number of references to how, as you progress in the spiritual path, your sleep gets less and less eventful, more and more peaceful and restorative. I think there's probably apocryphal, maybe it's in the commentaries that like you stop snoring. The Buddha in one well-known sutta, is it Vachigota Sutta? I'm not sure. The Buddha describes his sleep. He describes himself as lying on his side, folding his hands under his head, lying in a very a pose called is it the lion's pose? Mm-hmm. And remaining mindful all through the night, peaceful and serene, no disturbance. I wouldn't put a lot of energy into dreams. They're, in a sense, they're literally delusions. They're recyclings of your samsaric existence. They can drain away your energy. Maybe I'll leave it at that.
Sadhu. Thank you very much. Sierra says, wasn't me asking that question, but I was wondering if I had heard it before too. Figured I'd ask. Yes, always feel comfortable to ask questions. It's always good. And Spiral Spirit, hello, welcome. Very cool nickname. Says, hello, Bhantes. Can you talk about Samadhi? Well, that's Bhante Sudatta's favorite topic. So actually, if you go on our YouTube channel, you'll find, I think 90% of Sudatta's talks talk about Samadhi, more or less. But now you can have all three of the venerables speak briefly about Samadhi, especially since this is the last question, unless another one appears. So maybe starting from Bhante Sumano and then going from Bhante Sudatta to Tansanti.
The question was just, can you
talk about Samadhi? Anything you like, open-ended.
Sure. Well, I'd say for myself that one description of Samadhi that I really liked was the unification of mind. So the experience of the mind really just settling in one place, settling in stillness. And, I won't say that I've perfectly developed my Samadhi because I haven't. But those moments where I catch that the mind is settled and is resting and is unified and undistracted, those moments are really, they're indescribable, actually. Even after they've passed and, my mind's run off to something else, it's hard to even sort of go back and replay exactly what the experience was like. But the feeling, sort of this pre-verbal or non-verbal feeling is still there. And for me, it actually inspires a lot of faith in my practice, to know that even the difficult meditations, the distracting meditations, the painful meditations, whatever, have sort of set the groundwork or laid the conditions for that to happen. So Ajahn Brahm, I think, uses an analogy of, someone working for a paycheck. So you work, say, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And on Tuesday, you don't expect that you're going to get your paycheck necessarily. I've worked on Monday and why haven't I gotten paid yet? But no, you work, say, the full week, and then at the end, you get your paycheck. And initially, the analogy, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of, yeah. But then I saw, like, in myself how really just making an effort to show up and to practice and to try to subdue the mind, as the Dhammapada verse says, actually does pay off eventually. It's not necessarily in 5 days or even 5 weeks or 5 months, but little by little, the glimpses of Samadhi become more frequent. So I think that would be all I have to say about it. It doesn't have to be this, I'm going to sit down right now and boom, 4th jhana, because it's actually probably not going to happen that way. But rather, for me, it's been an incremental and not always straightforward either, but certainly incremental sort of process of developing the mind.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. Bhante Sudato?
Well, apparently 90% of my talks are about Samadhi, so I don't really think I need to say anything. But since I apparently have to say something, I'll say 4 words. Silent, still, bright mind. That's Samadhi.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Well, if that sounds appealing to you, what Bhante Siddhasa just pointed towards, I would offer, maybe as my final words of the evening, the encouragement to build a solid foundation for Samadhi practice. You can practice Samadhi all you want, but if you don't have a solid foundation, it's just like building a house on sand. It's not going to stand. And the foundation for Samadhi, all of the texts, as far as I know, agree, and all of the great teachers, ancient and modern, is sila, the foundation of being an ethical person, of basic morality and basic restraint. This is for very, very practical reasons that this teaching is so much a matter of consensus. Samadhi is certainly unification of mind. The classic definition is that Samadhi is non-distraction. And if you are like the great majority of people, basically, unless you are a psychopath, then at some level, if you're not living an ethical life, if you're not working towards integrity, you're going to be experiencing remorse, second guessing, tension. Yeah. You need to be developing sila. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but you have to be working towards it if you want to cultivate Samadhi.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Venerables. And Bhavani, actually, welcome, AP. Good to see you online. And Bhavani is saying, Namaste. What is meant by Dhammakaya meditation? Santi, would you like
This is another question for Bhante Pamukto.
Well, it actually has different meanings depending on the context.
That's true. Sorry.
Yeah.
You want to take this question?
No.
There is a sect of Buddhism in Thailand called Dhammakaya.
They're not quite Buddhist, but that's another story.
They might beg to differ.
Well,
But it's also-
perhaps we can stick to the definition of Dhammakaya.
there are the actually I'll try Bhakti-siddhasa one more time because he knows a lot more about Mahayana Buddhism than I do. It's a central concept, I believe.
You spoken, didn't you speak?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gave a
Recently?
talk on the three bodies of the Buddha. I think I called it Manifestation of the Tathagata. I think that was the name of the talk. Or Manifestation of the Buddha. That's right, Manifestation of the Buddha. I think that's what it was called. And in that I spoke about the three bodies of the Buddha, and one of them is called Dhammakaya Buddha. So one style of meditation is to meditate on Dhammakaya Buddha. But that would be a whole talk in and of itself. So I think we're not going into detail on that right now.
All right, so Bhavani, you can search the talk and get more information on that. And the Secret Spy Records is saying, Venerables, how long have you been wearing glasses? I had to start wearing 10 years ago. Just
Oh, we're
curious
all
if
wearing
it's not
glasses.
rude to ask. Yes.
I just realized that.
Interesting. This is the glasses monk chat.
Since I was 6 years old. Possibly earlier, I think 5 years old actually.
For me, 13 years old. That's when I realized I couldn't quite see that well in the back of the classroom.
19 or 20. Too many books.
Great. Oh, yeah. Neither myself nor Venerable Pamuto has glasses.
LASIK.
Oh,
right?
he has LASIK. So I'm the only one, well, who pretends to see, really.
She actually needs to wear glasses. She just refuses to.
No, I do fine. And Ethan says, any thoughts on the goals of lay life being at odds with the goal of liberation? The goals of each seem to be opposites. So perhaps Venerable Subano.
Oh, sure. Well, actually, it's I'm not sure what you mean by the goals of lay life. Because as far as I know in the suttas, at least, the Buddha doesn't say that lay life has a particular goal, and actually that every living being's goal should be the complete destruction of craving. So in some ways, I would say that they're not opposed, because I'm definitely one of the people that falls in the camp that believes that even lay people can achieve full enlightenment. Disclaimer, though, is that most lay people are completely uninterested in full enlightenment. So I would say that the goal actually is something that you decide for yourself. And it, in some ways, has nothing to do with whether you're a monastic or a layperson. So if you're a layperson and you want full enlightenment, well, let go of everything. And you can do that as a layperson. But if what you're pointing to, and I think this is more what you're pointing to, is that when you're a layperson, you tend to acquire a lot of things and get entangled in a lot of things, and your primary focus shifts from letting go, but rather to taking on, then of course it's in opposition to renunciation. But it doesn't really have anything to do with being a layperson per se. You always have the power to choose the direction of your life. There are very few limitations that come to mind, and really the only one, maybe two, is maybe taking care of an elderly family member and raising young children. So those are sort of situations where you do have a commitment a commitment to do something that, you know, will entail some amount of activities that might not allow you to let go of everything. But other than that, I mean, you don't have to listen to music, you don't have to drink at a bar, you don't have to do other things that lay people tend to like to do. But rather, you can incline the mind towards letting go. And I think actually you start to find that that's a much more peaceful way to live. And you might even like it. And who knows, you might achieve full enlightenment too.
Great. Well, it seems like Bhante Sumala is liking it, so he might achieve full enlightenment pretty soon. And actually, Ethan is following up on his question, saying, on one end, I think Lay Life is saying, it's building up me. On the other end, it's the Buddha saying, I am is a cancer, a disease, an arrow. Thoughts? He's also saying, on one end, it's building up. Oh, yeah. Sorry, he repeated the same thing. So on one end, it's building up me. On the other, and it's the Buddha saying, I am is a cancer, disease, an arrow. Thoughts? Maybe Tansanti wants to share some thoughts.
Well, in the original question, I think the word was goals, plural, rather than just goal. Is that right?
Correct.
And I think that was a good choice in terms of your follow-up question too. There are many lay people who have quite selfless goals, commitments to work that isn't all about me. People who are committed to social justice causes or fighting many of the scourges of mankind, diseases and pollution and all kinds of terrible problems that it can be quite skillful to put life energy into addressing. Pursuing right livelihood without without the goal of simply like building up your ego or something is I think something we can admire and use for our spiritual development. I think it's about what goals you choose, and that can be true for monastics as well. It's there's a wonderful freedom that monastic life gives us to pursue the highest goal, as we understand it. But it's also possible to fall away from that, to get confused about your goals and to lose direction. So whether you're in lay life or monastic life, the main thing is to like make sure your values are in line and you're going the right way towards the goal you have in mind.
Thank you so much, Venerable. And Robin is asking, are there variations between individuals that affect their concentration? Is it just plain easier for some people and harder for others? Sudaso?
Yes. Yes, the result of past life karma. Just like some people, they just seem to be natural born musicians or natural born basketball players or natural born mathematicians. Why? Oh, it's because they've been mathematicians for countless lifetimes. They've been playing basketball for countless lifetimes. They've been playing music for countless lifetimes. So they already carry into this life a talent, a skill for those things. So similarly, some people have been practicing samadhi for many lifetimes. So they come into this life and they already have a well-developed talent for samadhi. So yeah, for some people it's a lot easier than for others. Don't worry about it. Just practice samadhi. Whether you get really deep samadhi this life or not, if you practice samadhi, then you'll get really deep samadhi in some life. Maybe this is one of the lives where you're building up the talent so that in a future life, you'll be one of the people for whom samadhi is really easy. Or maybe actually your conditions are better than you think they are. I've met a lot of people who think that they're hopeless at samadhi, but actually, if they stick with it and they practice properly and practice well and they establish the right conditions and they let go of their attachments to meaningless activities and distractions, then they discover that actually samadhi is doable for them. That the problem wasn't a lack of talent for samadhi, but rather that they were sabotaging their own efforts. So don't get disheartened. But yeah, to answer your question, fundamentally, yeah, some people, they come into this life with an aptitude for samadhi that they've built up through past lives. And others, we have a bit more work to do. And that's okay. That's just how it is.
Yes, I'm personally still working on it. And Sierra is asking, what does a residency look like at the monastery with you all? And are there prerequisites? Well, since Bhante Sumano before ordaining actually did a residency, maybe it's appropriate to ask him.
Sure. And now I'm the guest monk, so
exactly,
also
very appropriate.
Well, being a resident means that you're participating in the daily schedule, which generally speaking is meditation in the morning and evening, coming to these talks live, sutta study in the morning, Dhamma talk in the evening, helping out with some of the monastery tasks, and then doing personal practice. So it's actually a really good way to experience sort of living the practice in a holistic way, a sort of daily, everyday sort of, well, while I'm taking out the trash, washing the dishes, cleaning a toilet, sitting in silence during a meal. So you get to see really how you can apply these principles really in every moment. And I would say it's actually been one of the experiences for me that have been the most transformative for my practice, because then you kind of step outside of, well, literally your day-to-day life and see a different way of living. And then if you do choose to go back to the way your life was, you can actually see, oh, well, when I was at the monastery and doing these things, it was actually possible to be mindful or to be in this meditative frame of mind for like 3 hours in the morning, whether it's getting ready for work or whatever. And so you can actually apply these principles in a practical way. Was there another part of the question other than what's it like?
Prerequisites.
Oh, prerequisites. It depends from monastery to monastery. Here, because of the pandemic, we've been requiring people who would like to stay for at least a month. We also have a winter retreat coming up, but because it's a period of intensive practice, it's really just open to people who have stayed at monasteries for a long period before or done long intensive retreats. But generally speaking, there's no prerequisite. You express your interest for coming, and if there's space and time, then the monks say yes, and you show up. You go from there.
Great, thank you, Bhante. So we have just 2 last questions. So we'll have some Zen answers since it's almost time to wrap up. So Yao is online. Hello, Yao. Good to see you. And is asking our first monk chat question. So you need to take it. And he says, so grateful for you all. We're very grateful for you too, Yao. Says, monk chat will soon be syndicated worldwide. As a lay person, I wonder if monastics have ongoing contact with their families, call, visit. Are there restrictions? Also, can you talk about Kapia, who helps you with errands? Lastly, how are you doing? We're doing well. I'll answer that. And
I'll answer these ones.
Okay, great.
So, yes, we can talk to our family members. Yes, we have 2 lay residents staying here helping us out. And yes, we're doing well.
Great.
Okay.
Sadhu.
And we would love to see you when things settle down a little bit.
Yeah. But you're also welcome to apply for a residency, Yao.
Yes.
And there's one more, right?
Yes, one more last question. Mark is asking, any thoughts on the famous book, I Am That, by Nisargadatta Maharaja.
I've read that book.
If anyone has read it, I didn't. A presumed liberated person.
Yeah, I read it. It bears some vague resemblance to Buddhism, but fundamentally it's a Hindu book written by a Hindu teacher talking about Hindu practice. So for some reason it's popular among some Buddhist people, but it's not a Buddhist book and it's not Buddhist teachings. Yeah.
All right. Okay. That was to the point. And good to see you, Bhante Varapanyo.
Oh.
Tuning in, I assume, from Burma. Good to see you online and good to see you all, friends. So thank you for joining us tonight at Monk Chat. If you're around this weekend and want to see us live, we will be going on impromptu alms rounds tomorrow in Montclair at the Montclair Farmers Market from West Orange. We're coming from West Orange and we're going to Montclair. So if you want to come and say hello, we will be there. And then in the afternoon, we'll be doing a hiking and meditation retreat. That might also happen on Sunday afternoon as well, unless it's pouring. Like it seems the weather forecast is a little bit undecided. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's raining. So definitely tomorrow it's sunny though. So we'll see you there if you're around. And if not, we'll see you again next week. So as usual, we meet online every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 a.m. with Sutta study. And 7:30 p.m. with meditation and Dhamma discussion. And Friday evening, there's always Monk Chat where you can bring questions. And of course, all of these times are New York City time in the US. So you'll have to do the math for the time zone where you are in. But we know that in Chile, it's 2 hours. Plus 2 hours. All right. Well, have a great rest of the day wherever you are. And we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.